back by popular demand, welcome Peg Eddy.
It is a real honor and privilege to spend some time with you this afternoon sharing information and some ideas about increasing the financial literacy of our children and grandchildren. Now, before I begin in earnest, 2 comments. First of all, I am a fee-only certified financial planner. There are no insurance policies in that box over there, and there are no offering materials for underwater chinchilla farms or windmill factories, so please just relax. You can get your shoulders down from your ears. Secondly, I am a parent and a grandparent, and I would never ever tell any parent or grandparent how to raise their child or grandchild. The ideas that I'm going to share with you hopefully will enhance your experience as a parent or grandparent or godparent around young people. Because I happen to believe my mother-in-law was very right years ago when she told me that manners are caught, not taught. And I happen to believe that money manners are caught, not taught. And how we behave with money around children really can imprint on them some positive experiences and perhaps not so positive. So as we go through the presentation today, please know that I am not trying to correct, I'm just trying to enhance your experience with younger people and perhaps offset the waterfall effect that we saw in 08 and 09 with generations to come if they are more financially literate. This is my hope, and I'm a very hopeful person. So today what we're going to do is examine our own money psyche for a little while. We're going to talk about our own financial fitness. And then I will talk a little bit about some age-specific exercises for different ages of children. And because we want to honor your time and be respectful of your time, I've summarized a lot of material in this booklet that each of you can have. And in the back, we also have resource material that is categorized so that you can see if it's a website for parents or for a child or for both. So it's pretty powerful information, and I encourage you to take one copy with you. You're more than welcome to take a copy. So let's talk about that word money. Very charged word. As a matter of fact, I shouldn't be surprised as a financial professional, yet I still am, when people come into my office. Talking about money is a very difficult thing to do. Money in our society is still very much a taboo topic. We can talk about sex, politics, and religion, but when it comes to money, it seems people shut down. So today, just for about 35 minutes together, I'm going to get money out of the closet, and we're going to put it on the table and talk about it. So I'm kind of curious. When I said that word, what was the first thing that came to your mind? What do you associate with that word money? Anyone? Yes?
Budget.
Budget, okay. We can call it systematic spending schedule if that's more palatable, okay? How about anyone else?
Giving.
Giving, okay.
Fun and risk.
Right. How about any other associations?
Hard work.
Hard work.
Stress.
Stress.
Freedom.
Freedom. Thank you. When I ask that one question, I get different responses, of course, and I'm waiting for the question to be answered this way, control. Because many times, particularly in family businesses, and I do a fair amount of work with family-owned businesses, the gifting has sort of a subliminal quid pro quo, but we don't have enough time to discuss that today. I'm also waiting for, I don't do that kind of counseling, but when I ask that of a couple, their answers sometimes will be very different, and many times they didn't have the money talk before they got married, and there's this light that goes on. Like, oh, that's why I send you to 7-Eleven for a quart of milk, you come back with a new suit. I mean, just very different reactions to money, because I believe the way we're raised with money happens to imprint on us a lot of the behavior we have as adults. So that's a question that I do ask people who are in our office for the first time. The second question is, what was money like for you when you were growing up? Think about that. I asked, did your parents talk about money around the table? Did you know what your dad made? Did you get an allowance? Who bought your prom dress? Who bought your first car? Who paid for your college
Never
education?
brought my prom dress for me.
I'm so sorry. And that, yes, Emmy.
Oh, did you want
Yeah,
us
sure.
to?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say mine was very like all over the place because depending on how the stock market did that day and how his business was, my dad's moods would go up and down. If he made a bunch of money in the stock market, he'd hand everybody a $20 bill, but the rest of the time we were paid like $1 an hour to clean weeds, and we had no allowance, and so we just had to, starting at the age of 5 or whatever, if we wanted money, we had to go out and work for it. And then my mom never spent any money. And so it was just this weird like dichotomy where my dad would kind of go crazy and just start handing out $20 bills, but it was only every once in a while, and the rest of the time we had to work really hard. And so we kind of were taught these weird things, like my dad was investing, and we were talking about investing, and he's spending a lot in the market.
And yet,
but at home he wouldn't spend anything, and we were on a very tight budget, and so it was a weird thing where you start to learn, like, okay, save 5 cents here, 5 cents there, but it's no problem if you lose $100,000 on stock.
it's kind of a mixed message.
Yeah.
I remember asking a woman about those 2 money questions. She's very accomplished, PhD, professor, taught, wrote, traveled around the world, and she looked at me and then she put her head down and squirmed in her chair a little bit and got a little teary, and for her, money meant food. And she proceeded to tell me that at age 9 or 10, she had to find ways to earn money around the neighborhood because her mom was a single mom and her mom was an alcoholic. And there was never enough food in the house. So that sort of told me, before we actually worked with her, no matter what the numbers showed as far as her being able to be financially independent, that she could travel, that she could have some things she'd not had as a child. Emotionally, she could not facilitate and really integrate that information. And it took quite a while after the work was done to convince her that she could actually afford a new car. She had never had a new car in her life. And one of the happiest moments in my professional life was when she called me from the parking lot in our office building and said, "Come on downstairs, I'm outside with my new car." So I went downstairs and she had the passenger door open and she said, "Come on, sit in. And I sat down and she said, "Can you smell that new car smell? I've never had that before." And that, I think, was left over from the way she was raised. So I just bring that up because as we go through this presentation today, you might just want to keep that in the background. And you might also want to ask your children what money means to them. Or your niece or nephew, or your grandchildren, or a godchild, or the kid next door. Alan.
So my father was all about control.
Oh, yes.
My mother was all about trying to get him in leadership control. She was totally unsuccessful. My brother went the other way. He's overly generous with his children. And so now, when issues come up for me with my children, I call my brother and say, "I'm not acting like my father, am
Ah, that's good, yes. It echoes. Much like hearing the stories from our grandparents about the big depression before the big depression, all right? And sometimes losing it all truly was $50, and that was a lot of money, but that story has continued. And I think if they really study people in 401k plans who left their money in cash, they're going to see that legacy probably around in people's minds. So as the airlines say, before we help anybody else, when the mask falls from the compartment above, we put the mask on ourselves first. And that means before we try to help our children to become financially literate, we need to be paragons of financial fitness ourselves. And I'm just going to share with you a couple of tips, but they are nicely summarized for you to take. These are the Eddy axioms of financial fitness. It does start with cash flow. And I know each of you in this room know to the dime what the cash flow situation is in your household. You know what your break-even point is, you know what your discretionary income is, you know what your overhead concerns are, and not only do you know it, you've shared it with family members. Because if you become a walking ATM machine, giving out the money or the 20s when the market does well, and then the next day they hear, well, money doesn't grow on trees, that also is a mixed message. And I'm not suggesting when someone's in a crib, you show them a spreadsheet. But as your children age, talking about what cash flow there is in the household, irrespective of the numbers of zeros on your net worth statement, I think that is all right to do, but you don't want to scare them. I remember we did quite a bit of work with our own children, and the exercises I'm going to go over with you are tested. They're not just pulled out of the air. My sons are still upright and they're functioning, they're financially set. But Ryan told me, our younger son, who's now 30, told me a couple of years ago that he was really afraid that SDG is going to turn out the lights. And I said, where did you get that? And he said, because you always told me when I left a room, turn the lights out because because it costs money to keep the lights on. So I really overdid it with him. And he was the child who squeezed the nickels until the buffalo screamed, you know. So, and usually if you have more than one child, you get different behavior. In your family, that's an example. When you have 3, statistically, the more children you have, the more different outcomes you have, because again, our children are carbon copies of each other, fortunately. But at any rate, you do want to check on your cash flow. Tax planning, you want to do that more now because apparently those, excuse me, does anybody have a relative in Congress before I put my foot in? The idiots on the Hill have extended the Bush tax cuts for 2 more years. Great. We know the deficit, what's going to happen to taxes after that. Capital gains will go up, income tax rates will go up, and state taxes will go up. So we have some windows of opportunity here regarding accelerated gifting during lifetime and also capital gains treatment for assets. So really don't wait until now to find out had you done something last year or do something this year. Surprises are great at holidays and birthdays, but not on April 15th. So you do need to do effective tax planning, both personally and in your business life if you still own the business. I think it's also important that you take a look at your investment statements. I know in 08 and 09 no one opened them, and that's all right. Stress does take a toll on the body. But taking a look and making sure that you understand the 4-letter word risk. Risk is different than volatility. You experience volatility in your household from the movements day to day. Risk is really can be lifelong, good or bad, if you allocate your assets improperly and lose them consistently over time. Another point, insurance. I don't sell it, I know enough to be dangerous. You kind of get style points if you have the right beneficiary on an insurance policy statement. If you've been married multiple times and you need it for spousal support to underwrite it for an ex-spouse, that's all right. But if you now have a current spouse and the ex-spouse's name is on the beneficiary paperwork, you may want to change that. I think that's appropriate. There are also 2 attorneys for every one of us in San Diego, so make sure that your net worth is protected adequately, and excuse me, that your umbrella policy is in place, your trust is named additional insured, and all of those details. So now I know if you had been given this when you came in, and you'll be given it when you leave. If you've gone over this, you can check, 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 and you're perfect. So now we're going to move on to how we can help young people. People always say, when do we start working with children? And I say it's when they stop swallowing money and when they can count. And the best thing, using an old accounting term, the source and application of funds, is a money-savvy pig. Now, where you can get these, people always ask. That's the only question they ask me after my presentations. And I think I'm becoming known as, the pig lady in San Diego County. I don't make these, I don't sell them, I wish I had. But the information is in the back of the book here. It's a woman in Colorado who is a trust officer, and she quit her job and came up with these. But you see there are 4 slots. I know there was a speaker earlier on, I think in January, November, that was talking about 3 allocations of funds. This has save, spend, donate, and invest. Also, it has 4 little eggs with 4 little plugs that you can remove to access the funds. So it's very easy starting even with someone who's 3. If they get $1 allowance, they have here a slot. And you can start to work with them on allocating their funds into these different areas. And then here comes the tough part. Later on, when they want to spend it for something, this is where the parentectomy comes into play. You step back and you allow them to buy the worst made, the cheapest manufacturer, beautifully packaged toy that falls apart in 3 seconds after you get it home, and they will learn that lesson. Also, when it comes to spending, if they get an allowance, encourage them to allocate it as they see fit, but again, you let them make their decisions because we want them to have financial training wheels. Better for them to learn this at early ages than when they inherit large sums from any of us in this room if we don't spend it during our lifetimes having a good time. Let's talk about the 3-year-old. I don't know about you, I do have an IQ above the room temperature, but I thought a nickel was what? More worth than a dime. Why?
It's bigger.
It's bigger. You can have little children just trace coins and then lay out the equivalent of peas or beans or paper clips for the denomination. Now, I know we're not going to be using coins in a while. We'll be using all the Chinese currency apparently. But at any rate, that's a concept you can teach with young children. How many of you have gone through the drive-thru with a little child in the back seat, the ATM? and you're in the window, the money comes out. Have you ever asked them what that's about? A lot of times they think it's a vending machine. It's kind of nice to let them know that there needs to be money in the account for those bills to come out. Now that sounds really simple, but we all take that for granted. We think that they understand that. They don't. It's much like when I talk to MBA or people that are highly educated, even in the financial field, and I start talking about equities and fixed income, I assume they know stocks and bonds, what those definitions are. I've learned my lesson the hard way. 20 years ago I learned I don't say that anymore. All right? So for young children, being sure that they understand just basic functions is important. You can take them to a bank if we're actually going to have brick buildings where people will be going to put money in. If you want to open a savings account for them, you can do that. Other things you can do as they age. I had a client who has a 10-year-old daughter, and she was in the office the other day, and this little girl came up to me and she goes, "Miss Peggy," fortunately not Miss Piggy, she goes, "I'm cutting out coupons for my mom." I said, "Oh, that's great." And she said, "And then when we go shopping, I get the coupons and I match it to the item." I said, "That's great. You're reading and you're learning selection and helping your mom." She said, "I worked out an idea. I worked out a really good deal with my mom. Whatever she saves, she pays me half." And I thought, great, she's going to be an entrepreneur. So that's an idea. When you go on a trip, you don't have to be a walking ATM machine. What we did with our children, we gave them $20 a piece before we went to Washington, D.C. when they were young. We said, whatever you want to buy of the tourist things, have at it. Whatever's left, you can save and spend later. And they made some very wise decisions, and our older son actually bought one thing, I think it was the Jefferson Memorial, and had it in his room overnight, and he returned it to the gift shop and got his money back. Clothing allowance when they're in junior high. I convinced our two sons, they are smart, but I convinced them there are only 3 seasons in San Diego. We did socks, shoes, underwear, jackets. They got a clothing allowance, and if they decided to blow that 1 season clothing allowance on one piece of clothing, oh well. And it was difficult, here again, a parentectomy, for me to step back and allow them to make that mistake with smaller amounts of money. Because again, we want to give them some training and an ability to make some decisions, whether they're good or bad, and they learn from that. When we talk about older children, let's talk about the car. I know the ad shows us the 16th birthday morning, and the kid coming down the stairs, and the parents are like this, and there's a car outside with a bow on it, and they blindfold the kid, and they take him out, and take the blindfold off, and there's that brand new car. And that's great. However, a neighbor of ours, when we moved in our neighborhood, when Sean and Ryan were 5 and 7, said, "Hey, I've got 4 boys, you've got 2. My boys are grown. Let me tell you what we did." So we listened. And he said he came up with this idea, which is written up in the booklet. He told his boys early on that whatever they saved for a car, which would have to be a used car, and of course I wanted the Volvo station wagon with the steel plates and airbags all over, they would match. And their name would be on the pink slip along with the child's. And on high school graduation day, they would sign the car over to the child on 3 conditions. 1, GPA of B. We could make up whatever we wished. 2, active in 1 extracurricular activity. Did not have to be sports. It could be ASB, stamp club, speech club, whatever it was. And 3, no drugs, including tobacco. So we did that with Sean and Ryan. Now with Ryan, again, the saver, we had to limit because he would have ended up with a Jaguar. But the children did save, they did get cars, they were used cars, and believe me, they took better care of those vehicles than if they had been given something. I would imagine you all did save for something when you were growing up. And you remember that feeling if you saved and you bought a bike the first time and you had skin in the game, how great that feeling is. And I know we want to make life easier for our children, but I don't think we want to take that away from them. I also would surmise that most of you had some financial interest in your college education, whether you worked part-time in the summers to underwrite certain activities, fees. Maybe you had a scholarship, that's great, you had to continue working. But I think having skin in the game really teaches our children something. Investing, let's talk about that. We set up a program when our children were juniors in high school respectively, and we seeded an account for them at Charles Schwab because it's a discount broker and they can buy anything they want. And the agreement was, again, that's in here, you can invest in anything you wish, you can take money out, but you can't put money back in. And whatever the account becomes in 5 years, we will match. So Sean lives in the Bay Area, so I was telling these women back, I always tell this story about him, and he doesn't know, because he doesn't know I'm here today, which is a good thing. He'll never meet him probably, because he'd be embarrassed, but he has an MBA now, he'd really be embarrassed. But he decided to buy a satellite stock with his funds. And literally about 3 years into this investment, they blew the satellite up in space, literally, so his investment blew up. And to this day, even though he is 33 and he does wise investing, he uses mutual funds, he doesn't pick individual stocks. He's not a CFA, he doesn't have that training, so he doesn't pick individual stocks, nor does he put all of his funds in one mutual fund or one investment. And that was a pretty inexpensive lesson, not for him, but from our viewpoint it was. Ryan left most of his money in money market, no surprise. And when he got into college, he did start moving it, but very gradually. He was a more cautious child. Not that Sean is, out there wild, but very different. But again, you can teach children with small amounts of money. If your children are older, one thing I think it's important, not just between spouses and significant others, but to talk about financial expectations, which I don't think happen a lot in your household. For instance, if you're fortunate to have a daughter, sophomore in high school, and the big wedding is coming up in England, right? There's lots going on in the press. You might want to talk about what her idea is, even as a sophomore in high school, and then you can revisit it periodically, and then when she gets engaged, you really need to revisit it. Are we doing my big fat Greek wedding? Are we doing Buckingham Palace and Westminster Abbey? What is the expectation, no matter how many dollars we owe, for that one day? Some parents have told us again, and we did this with our children, although we had sons, and we just gave them a sum, and we said, you can use this for whatever you wish. If you want to buy a car, if you want a down payment for a home, this is a wedding gift, and you may use that. And their spouses, fortunately, were financially astute, and they worked within a budget using those funds, I guess, for the wedding. But it wasn't over the top. Now, I don't have any problem going over the top about a wedding. It's important, however, to talk about expectations. There's a client of ours who's ready to retire. He's a medical individual, and I was looking at his expense sheet last week, and I noticed there was a line item he had written in on his expense printout, and it said son and daughter-in-law. And I said, how old's your son now? Because we've worked with this man for years. And he goes, oh, he's about 40. And I said, what is this $25,000 down here? Is that annually? And he said, well, yeah. And I said, well, has your son left a profession or something? He said, no, but they can't manage on what they bring into the household. And I said, so this is an expectation every single year that you're going to come up with $25,000 to help close the gap, because they're living at that level, because he's filled that in. Now, this may sound very judgmental on my part. It's certainly a parent's prerogative to give money, but this man was really struggling because he did not do very smart things with his portfolio in 08, the first part of 09, and he had to extend his retirement. We were not managing his funds, by the way. I want to make that very clear. But his daughter-in-law is a professional. His son is a professional. I have seen their tax return, and it's just amazing to me that goes on. Buying housing, I think houses is a little bit easier than it was several years ago in San Diego to get our children into houses in San Diego. I think, again, if you want to gift a down payment, that's fine, not a problem. If you want to do an equity sharing arrangement, I think that's fine. I think it should be in writing. I think they should understand that when they sell the house, what is your expectation? Are you writing a loan for the next property? Who's going to cover extraordinary expenses like roof repair? How are you going to split the tax deductibility of the property taxes and the mortgage payment, if there is any? But again, just talk about it. Assumptions usually get you into trouble, and I think that bringing it out and talking about it in a family setting is not that threatening. With younger children, I found, particularly with our children, when I was driving them to soccer practice, I could talk with them because I wasn't looking right at them, or if we were walking on the beach, I wasn't looking right at them, and the conversation flowed. Some of you may, like we had family meetings periodically, and to this day, when our adult sons come home, they still sit in the same chairs where they used to sit as little boys. But we had the agenda on the refrigerator door, and they could add things they wanted to talk about. We also had additional chores on the refrigerator door, because they did get an allowance, and I'll touch on that in a moment, and they had the opportunity to earn more money. with additional chores, and we would negotiate on the fee sometimes, which was fine. But they did have the opportunity to be incentivized to earn more funds. But I always tell individuals when I'm talking about this, if you do that, please do not pay for a mediocre or sloppy job. I'm an employer, and I don't pay people on my team for being mediocre or sloppy. So we don't want to set that up with our children. You don't have to wear white gloves and run it over the car if they were supposed to dust it or polish it. But please approach it in a business-like way so that they know that for a fair day's work, they get a fair day's wage. Unless they're, never mind, I'm not going to talk about Wisconsin. Okay, so that is another way to take care of the entitlement mentality, because once the big E starts in your family, it's very difficult to take care of. Very, very difficult. Especially again in family-owned businesses. I will interview the sons of founders and I'll say, so, you're earning X. Can you get a job anywhere else? And this is the answer I get. Well, yeah, but not at this salary. And a lot of times the son hates what he's doing, but he is tied into that family business because the salary is so high, he can't afford to work elsewhere. And that starts to erode in the business over time. So be careful about that if you are involved with family businesses. Let's talk about sharing. Little children understand the concept, and all of you in this room understand time, treasure, and talent, because that certainly is what SVP is all about. Allow your children in the donating slot to decide where they want to have those funds go, because they'll have opportunities soon enough to be on your foundation board or to help make decisions for the family funds. If they want to do the the Humane Society, fine. If they want to help build water wells in Africa, that's fine. And I know some of you have taken your children on trips and let them decide where in the world they'd like to go to help others. And they get a tremendous opportunity, a tremendous feeling for doing that. But I think it's important that, again, we step back and we let our children fill out in their own minds how they'd like to share some of the money that they've set aside. Some of our clients have taught us wonderful things. There's a grandfather who set up his informal, non-official donor advised fund, only there was no advice. He has 6 grandchildren. He said, when you're 7, each of you get $1,000, and you can give it away however you wish. Now, I realize that's not the SVP way, but he had to start them somewhere, and he now is a partner, so he's learning. And he's 80, so you're never too late to learn this. But he said, the one condition is, you need to write me a letter and tell me what you did with $1,000. And he showed me some of those letters. They're in pencil, on the notebook paper, and some of them were just touching. Just touching. One little boy was in Philadelphia. He said, it was winter when I got your money, Grandpa, and I went out on the snowy streets, and my mom got smaller bills for me, and I hope I helped feed people. Well, we know that Choupon's a fast food restaurant probably would have been better, but again, they're learning to share, and what that is all about. A panel that I actually moderated years ago, a woman with her own foundation had set up a giving circle for her grandchildren. And once you reached age 9, you were part of the giving circle. And a certain dollar amount was set aside for the 2nd generation and 3rd generation to decide how they wanted to give that away. Another client set up a donor advised fund, and the grandchildren and children participated in that decision, and they would choose a theme for the year. But they just didn't choose a theme and write a check. If a child or grandchild was really interested in one specific area for giving, they had to research it. They didn't do the vetting we do, but they had to be able to give some feedback to the family, to the giving circle, and to pitch their particular organization they would like to underwrite. So there are many things that you can do. Taking your children, I know many of you have taken your children to orphanages to give away toys and clothing. I know that you've worked in soup kitchens. I know Kid Corps is very active. Some of your children may belong to that organization. So there are a tremendous amount of things that you can do. But I think starting early really does help your children as they grow to become very good philanthropists, and then eventually join SVP, of course. So we've talked a little bit about saving, spending, sharing. Let's talk a little bit more about investing. I think when our children get into high school, they can certainly manage, although there was a gentleman yesterday that I was listening to who has children younger than high school students that is really, really into investing. Explaining, and you can use your own brokerage statement. Don't get concerned that there are lots of zeros on there and they think they're on Easy Street. But you can easily explain a stock means you own some of Pepsi-Cola, or you own some of Disney, or Sony, or Apple. And I don't know why you can tell them about a bond. I would certainly hope, someone, a freshman in high school is not buying bonds, but that you're renting your money. You're renting it to the city of San Diego, you're renting it to the government, you're renting it to a corporation, or renting it to a bank. And the payment is in the form of interest back. So they understand those two basic concepts. You can, again, as we talked about the matching investment plan, step back, but you can direct them to good sites for them to research. They can go to Vanguard, T. Rowe Price, and the bias toward no-load mutual funds. Some of the sites are excellent, and there are also some very, very good educational sites in here. Carrie Schwab Pomerantz has done a great deal on financial literacy training for children, and her site is mentioned in here as well, where you and your child can go on the site and learn together. But I think if you start when they're in high school, and then in college continue with them, by the time they get their first job, when they get the little brochure that says these are your choices of 401k plan, they won't just go, I'll think about it tomorrow. They'll have some training wheels, they'll have some exposure, they'll have some knowledge to make some very good decisions. And if they don't, they're only 22, 23, it's okay. All right, they have a long time because they'll be working to their 120 to underwrite all of our Social Security. They'll have very many careers in their lifetime. But these are very simple things that you can do to, again, encourage your children to become financially literate. I think we as parents should never teach our children to drive, and I'm not so sure moms should teach their sons to dance. But I do think that it's our responsibility to educate our children, help them to make their way in the world, have a sense of humor, but also have some financial tools before we push them out there. A word about credit. Judicious use of credit is fine. I'm not opposed to credit. I think over-leveraging is a very dangerous situation. I think it's brought countries to its knees, hopefully not ours yet, but we've seen what happens when too much credit is involved in financial markets. When a child is in high school, you can certainly set up a debit card for them and make it clear you're not covering any of the overruns or overcharges. You can also get a low balance credit card that you co-sign for when they're a minor and explain to them how it works. Explain to them with a debit card, it is kind of a nice idea to make a record somewhere on what they've used the debit card for. But get them set before they go off to college. Now, I know that colleges are preemptive now, having every credit card company east of El Centro coming to San Diego State freshman year and getting the tables up on the college green and selling credit cards as if they're pieces of pizza. But still, the average credit card balance of college graduates not associated with academic costs graduating from college today is close to $8,700. And again, we are a nation of financial illiterates, unfortunately, because money is just now becoming more and more talked about. And certainly our national policies are not any ones to emulate, I don't believe. And I just saw something online yesterday that our wonderful federal government is going to come up with funding to increase financial literacy training in high schools and grammar schools, which would be nice, but I would think they're going to start with themselves. So on the investing line, this is a book that you usually have your child read first because, again, they get a manual about a driver's license and not a dance manual, but this is written by a CPA that has a sense of humor, which is really great. And it's very easy read. It is not investing for dummies. I think that's insulting, but it's the everything investing book. And what the requirement is, and it's mentioned again in the write-up, before you fund the account and before they get started, they need to read this, all right? And truth be told, when we give it to parents for their teenager, I think the parents are reading it first, which is fine. I don't know. It talks about many types of mutual funds, difference between stocks and bonds. Very helpful information. Who has a teenager who might be a junior in high school? Anybody have a junior in high school? Freshman? Here, you can get us okay, then my bless.
Her idea of investing is investing in the best new clothes.
Oh, yes. Well, now the clothing allowance, see, I brought that up. The other idea is, as your child gets a little bit older, because they have savings and because they have discretionary jobs they can do for more money.
She does all that goes into clothes.
That's fine. That's fine. But see, the makeup that you're buying maybe for her, you can shift that to her schedule. And slowly we take those grooming things over. I have boys, so it was really
She has everything on her schedule.
great.
She uses all of her clothing allowance all of her birthday money, all of her investing, and all of her savings for clothes and makeup.
And that's great. That's a great lesson. I know that's killing you, but she's going to learn.
She looks fabulous.
I
I hope so.
And good on her. That'll be good. But no, she's not going to be in the street corner. No, I'm kidding. So, all right. Who has?
But I mean, is that one of those things you just let it?
I think you let it go, but I think you also.
I do mention. I mean, I kind of say, well, since I say, oh, it's kind of interesting how your birthday is in February and Christmas is in December, and so you get all of this money at one chunk in the year, and I wonder if it would make sense to maybe save some money so that you could have more money for clothes in the fall or something like that. And she's like, interesting.
And
But
then
then,
she goes, right.
oh yeah, no, but it's.
I think that's fine, provided you're not backfilling. If you're backfilling,
Yeah.
that's
And
not
she's
gonna
fine.
work.
If she goes,
And
she'll
that's fine.
go 9 months without buying any clothes. I mean, she just, yeah.
But before she goes to college, I think you need to make it clear, of course, what expenses you're underwriting: books, tuition, room,
Yeah.
board, travel to and from. But maybe she has a clothing allowance and that's it. She might have to get a part-time job for ski trips or dues or those kinds of things. Again, we're talking about expectations, and I know I sound like a curmudgeon, but believe me, after 30 years advising people about money, what I see in my office, again, should not shock me any longer. Unfortunately, I still see women in their late 30s and 40s who've not written out a check in their entire lives because their dads took care of them growing up, which is fine. They got married right from college, which is fine. But someone said to them, don't worry your pretty little head, I'll take care of everything. I was invited to give a presentation to a garden club that shall remain nameless in North County one time, and I told them that I would do it on one condition, and they said, what was that? And I said, I want a very nice trailer out in the parking lot with family attorneys in there, because when I get done talking to these women about what they need to know and what they don't know and what's going to happen to them, they'll be very angry, and they'll probably march right out there. And that was not my intent, and they never invited me. Why, but I really think, particularly for female children and women, it is imperative that they become financially astute. They're easy targets. They are going to outlive their male counterparts. They will control the wealth in the world. Women as investors are much better than men. It's been proven among investment clubs. The Association of Investment Clubs has statistics. Women do a better job because we trust our intuition. I think, unfortunately, it's beaten out of men. They teach intuition at Harvard Business School, but that was put there for a reason. Now, you don't invest based on intuition, of course, but that's not the guiding principle. But it's very important. I've seen widows. I'm so glad they're in our office because they're on the verge of having a nice young man in the lobby sell them an annuity. And it's just, I've undone so many of those. It's just, that's sort of my life's work, I'm doing those annuities that they don't need because now. But anyway, so I think it's really important to do that. So I've talked with you a little bit about money psyche. I've talked with you about what you think, what money you associate with that word, what your money mindset is, how you were raised with money. We talked a little bit about these financial fitness tips. We talked about some of the age-appropriate exercises that you can use with your children, grandchildren, or children in your neighborhood. Now's the time just to see if we want to share some ideas. I know I didn't cover allowances, and I know there are theories about that. We could talk about that all day. But if you have some questions or comments you'd like to share, please, this is the time, and then I will wrap it up so we can get you on your way. Yes?
2 questions. At what age do you think kids can really understand the concept of investing? And the second question is related to when you were talking about buying a car for your children. At what age did you start that discussion with them?
Okay. I'll take the last question first because we moved into this neighborhood and this gentleman almost came up as a moving man was going away. It was a contract, I don't know why. We started the car discussion when Sean and Ryan were 7 and 9 because they had to start saving. All right? So we started it when they were young and they could understand that. As far as the investing, I've seen children from probably even as young as 7th and 8th grade. Depends on the child. I don't think the child needs to be mathematically inclined. I think it depends on their interests. I don't know in your household if you all were jumping up and down and just waiting to invest in the stock market, having the experience you had as children.
It was just, it was different. I wanted nothing to do with it because of the volatility. But then my dad, but we had been beaten into us that we would save and we'd never take anything out of that savings account. And so I had a significant savings account going into college. And so then my dad said, here, pick one of these 3 stocks. And he told me like the stories of the 3, and I picked one. So we took all my savings and put it into one stock, and that one quadrupled because it was bought out. And then he had a friend of a friend that knew something about another stock, and that thing went up 10x. And so sophomore in college, I think I had like $360,000. And I was like, this stock market thing, that is really interesting. So that actually piqued my interest in it and ended me, going into that as a career. But it was it was just from that experience, which is not a normal experience. It was.
Well, thank you for that disclaimer. That was helpful. So I think as young as 7th grade or 8th grade, but again, you bring up a good point. Forcing and pushing and shoving and yelling and screaming is really not polite. We don't do it with adults, and I'm not suggesting any of you do that with your children. But that can, as we know, particularly with teenagers, they'll go the opposite way. The other thing that I would encourage you, I remember this family meeting that I had, and I asked around, it was 3 generations, and I got around to the 9-year-old granddaughter, and I said, so what does money mean to you? And she said, it means mommy and daddy fighting. And her mom and dad were in the room, and it was like, and the grandparents were like, oh, nice, And I said, well, they're fighting, and she said, because those things, those plastic things where you don't have to pay, and then you get a bill and you're surprised. She's talking about credit cards. They were fighting about that. And again, the parents were just really, I think there were 16 family members there, and they were just turning red. And so, children, you've heard that. All the songs about, I want to be just like you, Dad, cats in the cradle, teach children well, be careful, they're listening. All those songs about children picking up things, they really get the message. They really can get it. So if you're going to have a heated discussion, which is fine, then get it out. Don't do it where they can hear you. I really think that can scare them. Also, I know that there was a write-up just in the Wall Street Journal last week about millionaires and the percentage loss of their portfolios in 08 and 09, and the story about this one teenager who, in 08, he was just hyperventilating when his family was talking about going on a vacation, and he was yelling, we can't afford it, we can't afford it. So those money messages can be really damaging as well. I don't think you need to paint it as endless source of funds, but you need to balance it. Yes?
I know you're talking about kids and how we can help raise our kids more financially aware. By the way, the Rich Dad Poor Dad books I found very helpful with my sons when I was growing up. But I see members of the family or friends making good money, 400,000+. They're always surprised by their tax bill.
Yes.
Or they argue about small amounts of money.
Yeah.
So it's like there were 3 things you see couples do and always mess up.
Okay, first they don't have the money talk. That's just, they just don't talk about it at all. And these are 25, 30-year marriages. And they wonder, again, why there's this going on. And it's been going on since the history before. I think it's really important to discuss who's going to be the financial CFO. Do I have a checkbook? Do you have a checkbook? And then we have a family checkbook. Because if women have been working in a career, I don't know about any of you women, I don't want to go to Bob and ask him for money. I mean, that just, no, okay? So I think having the money talk is critical. Secondly, I think, again, as boring as it sounds, setting up some parameters as far as the spending goes. There's a lot that's being written now, and I've been asked to contribute to magazine articles on financial infidelity, where I go out and I hide all the shoes and all the clothes in the back of the closet, and the bill only comes to P.O. Box for me. Bob never knows about it. And then he's wondering why the joint vacation account has no money in it. I do remember interviewing a husband and wife and asking about, I was going over their balance sheet, Susie Sunshine, who I think you know, and I said, gee, I noticed this one account on her, and account number, and the woman said, what account? And I said, well, this one, and she glares at him. And he goes, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, I got that money when I had my bat mitzvah, and it's in a Swiss account now, it's really, really grown a whole lot. And I just wanted to slide under the chair, because again, I don't do that kind of counseling. So I think try to be forthcoming if that's the relationship you have, but that isn't always the case, and that's the second thing. And then thirdly, I think understanding what money means to that person, what does that represent, why, and taking some practice. I don't want people whining about taxes, surprises. That's why I said, you get your tax planning done. Now, I'm not like Warren Buffett or Bill Gates Sr., who spoke at my Rotary Club, who said, all the millionaires made tons of money, therefore we have to pay more. I don't particularly, I'm not in their group. They didn't invite me to dinner to tell me to give everything away. But I don't particularly espouse that. I think that entrepreneurs generally work very, very hard for their wealth, and I think that not very many members in Congress. This is my rule to run for Congress. You can't be an attorney. You have to own your business for 5 years and go through an OSHA audit and an IRS audit. You have to do your tax return in ink using the IRS booklet. No TurboTax, nothing. And then you can run for office. If they had some understanding about, number one, systematic spending themselves, we would be in a lot better spot. But the tax law itself, I think, eventually we might get to a value-added tax or a consumption tax. But you're right. I remember this man came up to me after a speech I gave in Orange County. He goes, my little girl's 3, and they're sending limos to pick the girls up and taking them for manis and petties, and they're only 3, and what do you think about that? And I said, I think that's kind of over the edge. What happened to a pony or anything like that? And he said, well, what do you think? I'm turning 40 next week, and my wife has this huge party planned in our backyard. And I said, well, what's it going to cost? He goes, well, about $140,000. And I'm thinking, we're not connecting here. But I know I kind of palavered there. But it is really, when I sit across the table, and my face is fairly expressive, so I should just wear a bag when people come in. But when no. And listen, but sometimes I had a fellow call me last week, and he said, I want to come in because my wife cannot understand that we cannot continue applying money back into this business. We have to diversify. She refuses to do it. And I said, I don't do that kind of counseling, but we can show what will happen. Because entrepreneurs, they're right. They get a higher ROI in their business. I don't argue with that. But they cannot take that stock certificate of a private company to Schwab or Fidelity and sell it. And when I look at their balance sheets, what are they? Focus in the business, focus in the real estate, and the company is the tenant of the commercial real estate. That bothers me a little bit. And when the liquidity event occurs, that's great, but the family knows nothing about other things to invest in. And it's a tremendous effort to get them to consider other things. I'm all in favor of alternate investments. I think that's great. And I like real estate, but not just those 2 things, because you can't take them to the bank. Any other questions? Yes?
What do you see in terms of, we have 50-50 custody, and the other side is we're budgeting and finance communication and all that, and the other side is just spend until your credit cards run out, and then share with all the kids how you're all out of money, and etc. So the kids see that 50% of the time, and then see ours, and so I think it goes back. It's hard for them to, because it's really. I think it also feels good and feels fun to just go and go on a big shopping spree. So how do you have clients like that deal with that, and how do they handle that?
What they do is they talk about it. How is it? Oh, Dad took us, on a jet, or we went to San Francisco for the day, or whatever it is, and say, well, you just talk about it. Do you think that most people do that? Well, no, we don't care, because it was really a lot of fun. Talking to children when they're little, it's kind of tough. But I think later on, when they get into college and they see other people at different economic levels, I think that opens the door a lot. Number one, they're usually very grateful when they come home from Thanksgiving because they have such a mean parent, to come home and they kiss the ground you walk on. But secondly, I think they have those midnight talks out in the hallway with other kids who maybe are on full scholarship or had nothing, and they kind of get things in perspective. But try to push back about that. I know you're careful about not maligning the other person, the other parent, because you don't want to do that either. But I think you just need to, what's that about? And try not to get upset about it. And just say, our values here are such and such. Our neighbor across the street when Ryan was in grammar school had every toy known to mankind, and that's great, fine. Senior year at Santa Clara, the night before graduation, Ryan said, Mom, thank you for not buying all these things because you could put me through college and I don't have one dime of academic debt. And now I know why you didn't buy those things. And I thought he wasn't listening when I said, we value education, we're putting money aside for education versus the motorhome and the jet skis and everything else. And at that time, I was the least favorite parent. But eventually, they get it. They get it. So don't think they're not listening. They are, and they're watching you. Watching you. Okay. Well, I am going to wrap up here. I want to thank you for being such a nice audience. I'm going to leave a business card, and I always do that. I'd like you to keep it. And the next time you happen to walk through a cemetery, if you see on someone's headstone their net worth engraved in your home, you'll see good friend, good spouse, good brother, good citizen, good philanthropist. Will not see. So although we've talked about the M word most of the afternoon that I've been with you, with all of your getting and your sharing and your giving and enjoying, please balance your life and seize the day and take joy in the people you love what you do, give with an open heart, and know that we usually only go this way once. So I thank you for your attention today, and I wish you well. Thanks very much.